be in total about an hour. And there's a recording in progress, apparently, so just that you know. With that, Sylvain, I'd love to invite you to tell your story. So just for me to introduce briefly, so Sylvain is a professor at McGill, and he has such a large number of accomplishments and prizes that I won't even attempt to list them all. Sylvain actually was our first choice for this first speaker, because I think Sylvain really combines this excellence in science with, I think, a great deal of very inspiring human qualities that I think you will not be able to help but realize today as well. So we were so excited, Sylvain, when you agreed to be with us today. So with that, I would like to give the floor to you for this unusual talk, perhaps.
Sure.
Yes. Are you open to questions while you talk, or would you like them afterwards?
No, anytime. Please.
Okay. So in that case, so people here physically can just raise their hands. People who are online following, you can type in the chat. And we, I think, have an option also to have your microphone open, and we can hear you here in the room, possibly with the very kind help of our tech-savvy Alex in the back. So we'll try it all out. And with that, Sylvain.
Thank you. Thank you, Floris. Thank you all for being here. Merci tout le monde pour l'invitation. I'm very pleased, to be the #1 speaker in the Montreal chapter of Growing Up in Science. Also a bit intimidated and uncertain about the expectations. So I looked up online. I tried to educate myself and looked at a few editions of Growing Up in Science from the NYU chapter and elsewhere. And I have to say, it's always, very inspiring to hear stories from people in general and from your peers in particular. So I'm going to try to match that more or less with my own personal journey. So I'm a physicist by training. I'm originally from France, but as of maybe 3 weeks ago, I became a Canadian citizen. So I'm very proud and very privileged to have become a Canadian and a French citizen always, so a dual citizen. So maybe before I tell my story as a physicist, I can say a few words about my personal journey and education and maybe background. So all my family is originally from small town France. My grandparents were, essentially from families of sharecroppers and peasants in the deep center of France, from the countryside. And their generation basically moved from the countryside to the city, even though it was a very small city to their standards, because that's where the jobs were, the heavy industry at the time, back in the probably 30s and 40s and 50s. This is where the job boom happened in France, and many of their countrymen and women moved from the countryside to get some decent jobs there. I don't think I'm the first in my family to have pursued higher education. My mom, for instance, was, I guess, the first in the family to pursue after lycée, after high school, a short technical training, professional training, and she has been a technician in hospital laboratories, where they do blood tests, etc. And my dad actually left school at 18, so right after high school, to enroll in the Navy, French Navy, because he wanted to escape, the destiny and the fate of, being stuck in this small town, working in heavy industry, having, little options basically to himself. And I mention this because I think one of the threads I would like to follow with you today, and which I think in retrospect, when I was trying to think about the few messages I wanted to share with you, is really be able to identify opportunities around you, and or seek opportunities whenever it's possible, and be able to grab and seize those opportunities, because yes, it might it creates some instability, but it also creates some new momentum in your life, and often, more often than not, it's for the best or for the better. So that's what my dad did, and basically enrolled with no qualification in the Navy, and this is where he got trained basically to become a mechanic, to work on these big engines in the Navy ships. And you know, I don't know how many times he circled the globe, but he told me that basically he didn't see much because he was, you know, in the belly of the ships. Of course, there were some shore leaves, etc. But so that's basically his own personal journey to I exaggerate a little bit, but to escape the destiny, you know, and the tradition basically that was established at the time. And I think he made one right choice because all this heavy industry collapsed basically in the 1980s, 1990s, and more probably than not, he would have lost his job, and it would have been, you know, a tragedy of some sort if he had followed the tradition. So I think that's also the other message is the virtue of, you know, education as a tool to basically broaden the scope of your opportunities. And so from this tradition in my family, I mean, this early young tradition of, you know, my parents getting some form of higher education, etc., as an elevator in the social pyramid, so to speak. So they really pushed me, you know, to try to perform or to actually develop my academic skills, and especially in the science and you know, math and science realms. Even though I was really, you know, attracted by literature, music, this kind of thing, but that was way too remote from my family focus, I think, or interest, so they did not encourage me too much to explore this kind of aspects, which I think I could have developed, and I'm trying to develop more or less today. Better late than never. So I went after, you know, I looked at different options, and after high school, I went to that prep school. In France, it's a very different system, but anyways, there's a system of prep school before going to university and college. So I went there, and the first comment, you know, just to realize a little bit of the style, I mean, of my character with respect to my science journey, I think. The first memory I have of that is I was not particularly a bright student. I was doing okay and quite serious, but, you know, doing my stuff. But at some point, we had this one-on-one test on the blackboard with a prof, and that was a math teacher. And so I don't remember what was the problem, you know, the problem to solve, but it doesn't matter. And at the end of the day, I thought I had solved the problem, you know, after, you know, sweating on the table, on the blackboard. And the prof came to me and said, that's quite an unusual, you know, solution you found through this problem. And I wouldn't say it's an elegant solution, but it's kind of, I mean, it looks like you have a Florentine spirit. And so I didn't know what to think of this, you know, and first of all, I didn't know exactly what it meant at the time to have a Florentine spirit, but it really struck me. And so I looked it up when I came back home. And to me, it sounded like a great compliment. Like if you've ever been to Florence, I mean, you will realize that having a Florentine spirit is something, you know, you can take as a compliment. But coming from a teacher and a professor, it could also be interpreted as, you know, somebody who has a convoluted way of thinking, etc. So give or take, you know, that's another message I would like to share with you, is that whenever somebody, especially you know, somebody in a position of authority in your field, or a peer, etc., or somebody you know, from completely outside your realm, sends you a message, especially something you could interpret as positive message, take it for granted, take it as it comes, because they are not so, you know, common, first of all, and often it can really help you get to know yourself a bit better and realize, you know, in what space you are, in what position you are in that big space of, you know, the realm of possibilities. So that's probably one of the relatively late, memories of, oh, maybe my way of thinking is kind of, let's say, different or creative, and whenever I'm facing a problem or a specific issue, I'm trying to find my way around it. If I don't have all the tools, that would make my way more direct, I would try everything and be persistent to find my way through it, around it, but above, below, etc.
What I think is interesting, if I may, also
Sure,
to highlight there, it sounds also like that comment of the teacher you could have easily also interpreted it in a negative way of saying, oh, I'm not managing to do what they want, and so my place is not here, but exactly. Somehow you managed to take it really quite positively.
Yeah, and I think it's just a trait of my character, and I know it's not a given for everyone to take things on a more positive way, so glass half full kind of thing. And I think I cannot tell you, okay, be like that, right? Because everyone is different in that respect. But this really helped me, have a thicker skin eventually. And indeed, always look at the, let's say, the bright side or brighter side of things, even when these kind of comments could be interpreted both ways. So yes, so after these 2 years of prep school, so I didn't know what to do with my life, with no career aspiration whatsoever. I think we went through that, at different degrees. It's quite classic, but it was becoming kind of urgent because after these 2 years, I had to really, elect or select or enroll into a more specific program. That's how it worked at the time. And so the other message I would like to share is, seeking mentorship. And it's easier said than done, right? Go and chat with and find a mentor. But so often you have to take chances. And so most of my peers in my class, in my group, would wanted to be engineers and work in the industry because that was the kind of royal highway in the kind of training program I was. But I knew from inside I would not fit. That was not my aspiration. So remember, I was hesitating at the time between literature, music, maybe a little bit of the arts. That was out of question due to some family pressure and my own pressure as well, maybe, and science and technology, let's say. And so. But at this point in my decision-making process, I could not, picture myself going and working in the industry. And it's hard for me to explain why. And maybe because it would have taken me too far from what I really love, what I really aspire to be. So again, I wanted to get a little bit closer to, this creative realm of things. But I could not put words on it. So I went to see to chat with my physics prof, who was a young guy that just came out of his own, professional training, and we were his first class, and so he was just starting his teaching career, and he was really, I could feel some connection for some reason, and that's how you maybe identify your mentors initially. So I went to see him, and he said, well, why don't you, look at the kind of school I did? And this is him talking, because, it's relatively open, and you have the opportunity to become a teacher like me, or if you want to go in the industry, maybe it's not the most direct way, but there's a possibility. And if you want to become a researcher and do science, that's great. But at the time, I didn't know what research was about. So I looked it up and looked at the documentation, the kind of programs they were offering, and I said, well, that's exactly what I want, because it buys me more time to basically to keep my options open, and while getting exposed to indeed education and teaching and science and research, etc. So I went there, and I was quite happy with the choice I had made. I was exposed to both, small privilege teaching in small groups and university amphitheaters and large classes. So, and this is where I met for the first time, people like Floris and I and Simon, so professors, university professors. And even though their teaching was not always, outstanding, you could realize that they were all kind of special characters, special individuals, and they were really passionate about, something in their life that they had left sometimes outside the classroom. But it didn't take too much to, go into this and have them, really embark on their passion, etc. So to me, that was interesting to see this collection of special characters. And for sure, I think researchers are one special collection of individuals with many different facets and flavors. So after that, I took up an internship, like a 3-month internship in a lab that was part of the curriculum. And so I got exposed to, the reality of research, how messy it is and how, less glamorous than that what we are exposed to through, the press, the media, but also now you're probably all at some level, involved into doing research and attending conferences, and you see amazing lectures and beautiful slides, and everything seems to, unfold as a story, as if, they move from one slide to the other, and the story is there, and the results are amazing, and the data is clean, and the conclusions, cannot be discussed because, wow, this is how science is done. But as you probably know already, this is now not how science is done. It's extremely complicated. The data, especially in life sciences and psychology and everything human related, probably, or biology related, is extremely messy and complicated to collect. So this is where I was exposed to that for the first time. It was a computer vision lab, but they were, trying to emulate some kind of human vision. I'm skipping the details here. And the problem the PI had was that, and that became my project, was that there was this paper that was describing a method, and I was supposed to fix the PI's code because the method was not working as expected. And so this is the first time I read through a scientific article. First time I was exposed to coding. I'm afraid to say it was a good 30 years ago already. So, the approach to coding, I guess, computers, etc., were not as omnipresent as today in the kind of research we do. But anyways, and I got interested in computer vision because I have to say, when I was studying at this college thing, I spent a lot of time in the library and working on class projects. And the cool thing about library is that you can, whenever you want to make a break, you can just stand and pick a book and look at it. And so I didn't read, but I went through many of these different books, often very, very superficially. But I ended up, reading David Marr's Vision book. And I did not realize at the time it was a classic, I think, already by that time. But I got inspired by this interfacing between life sciences and, let's say, computer science. And it was kind of burgeoning at the time, at least for me. And so, and I also, went through these books that were describing artificial neural networks, but back in the 20th century, the technology was not there to really realize the potential of deep neural networks, etc. But it was already there, as you probably have heard. People like Benju and Yann LeCun, etc. All these current stars in machine learning, they were already seasoned researchers back in the 1990s, but they were living on a dime because they didn't have the technology to implement their vision. So I went through that, and I said, well, that sounds interesting, but again, the technology wasn't there, and there was no lab, trying to implement artificial intelligence with deep neural networks. It was all based on, conceptual rule-based AI and etc. So again, skipping the details, I ended up in that lab. That was the closest internship that was offered on that, kind of computer vision, human vision, etc. I learned how to program on the spot because we were not exposed to programming, classes, or very little at the time. I guess today it's a bit, maybe it's a bit easier to learn, but so I had this book, programming in C, very dry, horrible. but you know, you put in the effort, and so at the end of the day, I got lucky, and I fixed the bug in the code, and it was working, and I became the, you know, the pet of the lab in a good way, because yeah, things were progressing. It was a little click, you know, and in my career, it's been there hasn't been any major discovery, but a large amount of small clicks, more small, you know, progress. And every progress, every little click in the right direction is such a relief and such you know, joy. And you have to look at it this way. So it's the accumulation of things and the experience going through those things that is really nurturing. Well, maybe I should you know, fast forward a little bit, but I remember the other thing I wanted to share with you is that I have the opportunity to do a master's, so I do my master's, and then I end up, you know, starting doing brain imaging, and it was probably one of the golden ages of imaging at the end of the 1990s. So I got lucky to be there at the right moment, you know, in the right place. But I was also conscious of, you know, how to get a job after, and so I learned on the spot, you know, all the opportunities and to get a job as a scientist. And all the messages I was receiving, you don't want to do, you know, this kind of brain imaging stuff because it's between disciplines. And even today it's difficult, but at the time it was even more academically, you know, rigid, where you had, okay, computer science, you had maybe life sciences and the different, you know, subspecialties. But if you wanted to do something at the intersection between different things, so maybe neuroscience, neuropsychology, brain imaging methods, etc., the messages I was getting from more experienced students, but also researchers, etc., is that you don't want to do that because, yes, you may have fun, but nobody will want to recruit you because you don't fit in the boxes of, you know, committees for recruitment or job interviews. They don't know in what department they're going to put you in. So yes, listen to the messages, but at some point, if you really feel passionate about something, especially if you want to spend 3, 4, 5 years on a PhD experience and training, you'd better love what the project is about. So with a little leap of faith, I ended up joining this lab that was developing this new technology for brain imaging. And so maybe a few words about the PhD experience. I think the message is that and it's true also for, you know, working as a scientist as a career eventually, is that you have to put a lot of effort and you have to put in a lot of hours. I know there's, and we can talk about that later, there is this consciousness today of, you know, work-life balance. And but at some point, especially in the early days, my personal experience was that my life was about my thesis and my project because I loved it so much. And every experience was really, I mean, every little step was an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to move forward, etc. So, but we'll talk about probably work-life balance later. But it became a passion, meaning that I didn't have much, you know, hobbies outside, but what was super important and what is super important is to have to make sure you have a support group around you. And that was the case in this lab at the time, which was expanding a lot because of the excitement around brain imaging at the time. So there were a lot of PhD students with a little bit of my background, so physics or, I don't know, applied math or, you know, computer science, working in the realm of neuropsychology and life sciences, neuroscience. So with other students from different backgrounds, and the blending was really super exciting. And so the amount of time I would spend in the lab, which was, you know, a lot of my life, was and the lack of external, you know, hobbies or I don't know, friends group, and my family was away. I mean, was far, so I didn't have that anyway. So it was compensated by this, you know, camaraderie we had founded all together in the lab. So we would spend a lot of time in the lab, not always very productively, but it was really a super fantastic experience. So I remember the lab was growing so much, we were put in a former kind of workshop, very dark and ugly place. But that was okay, and we decided to go around the corner and buy some paint and brushes, and we repainted the whole room. I don't know if it would be possible today, but this is the kind of spirit, you just take ownership of your space, of your project, and this is how you can really, live this experience in full. It's very intense, with ups and downs, and we said with Floris that we would share, some ups and downs, but maybe focus more on the downs and maybe the failures, etc. I think this is, and even today, of course, the papers get rejected, the grants gets rejected, and more often than we would wish for. But I think what's super important is to have a support group around you. So if it's, if the atmosphere in the lab with your peers, with the other students, is that of, again, camaraderie and mutual trust, with, not a spirit of competition between people, but rather complementariness. We are all working kind of on the same ideas, but with different angles. And it's important that you exchange and you share basically your thoughts, ideas, and tools, etc., and train each other. Well, this basically nucleus of around you will be your support group, and whenever you are exposed to failure or rejection, this is where you're going to get strength. And you will also bring strength and support to your peer whenever that happens to her or to him. Of course, as you grow up, so to speak, in science and in life, your family also is super important. And so your family needs to understand what you're going through in terms of professional experience. But maybe more on that later. But that's a message I wanted to share before I forget. So we spent hours and hours in the lab, that was basically our club and our workplace at the same time. And the border between, the kind of clubhouse and student union and workplace was very blurred. I remember it was the early days of, high-speed networks. It sounds like it's from Neanderthal, but anyways. And so the first thing we did was, after exchanging data whenever on the computers, that was super exciting. That was also to develop maps. There was a first-person shooter game at the time called Duke Nukem, whatever. And so it came with it was open science at the time. You could have the open code, and you could develop the floor plan of, let's say, this space and maybe Floris' office. So we did that. And we would spend hours, shooting each other virtually and putting hand grenades in the director's office. So I think it's to relieve the pressure. There was a lot of that. And the message I'd like to share also is that it's not because it's hard that you should not have fun, doing what you are going through. So I don't think there is any book, of rules and regulations that says black and white, you should not have fun while doing your PhD or working as a researcher or a professor or teacher. As long as the work is done, and as long as, you are being productive and I mean it in a good way. And I think it's important because, again, it's a matter of balance between the pressure of delivering and discovering stuff. And the importance of experiencing other things. So after the PhD, so there was a question you shared with me, Floris, about when to start looking for a postdoc, etc. I think what's super important, and I'm glad now that hopefully COVID is behind us. It's important that you have the opportunity to travel to conferences and just to meet people and other peers. There's a social aspect that's super fun and every person you meet can become potentially a collaborator later, if not a friend. And especially it's inspiring. I was talking about the very slick slides of this US investigator that's showing you his last science paper or her last Nature paper. First of all, you learn by example. So I remember also that a lot of us struggle writing papers. And even today, it's something I really realized, working with students, is that, it's super hard to write a story, a science story, black and white, with the figures that are self-contained and nice to look at, but also informative. And the text, flowing perfectly or close to perfection. And so the way I learned that, because I was struggling, and also there were the barrier of language, because we take it for granted in North America. Maybe in Quebec it's less pronounced, but a lot of us don't speak French, don't speak English as a first language, and all the usual channels of science communication, as you know very well, are in English. So the way I proceeded was that, I would take papers that I liked, not so much the results, but it helps if the results and the science is inspiring, but also the style. And I would basically copy bits and fragments of sentences that I thought would be useful later. So at the time, I remember I was copying by hand basically those things, and I would consign them in a book. And now you can probably just copy and paste. It doesn't matter. You get the idea, and this helped me tremendously. And probably you can take my first paper, and you would recognize fragments of things that look a bit patchy here and there, but really that helped me learn about writing. And this is often considered a soft skill, but I think it's one major skill of being a scientist. It belongs to this big realm of communication. I was talking about the slides, same story. Try to memorize and find a scientist that you think is a very powerful communicator, very efficient, and try to copy their style. And that's okay. It's about sharing, and communication of science is also how you communicate it. So I learned how to write, especially in English, scientific English, by just, with these many hours I put in the job of, copying and emulating basically the style. So for the postdoc, go to conferences, and maybe a year before it's time for you to graduate, I would recommend you start maybe going to the podium after this amazing scientist just presented, and just share your thoughts and be very honest with that person, and tell them that you would be on the market next year. And if you have 1 or 2 papers, in the works for your PhD, even better, because it's going to be your business card, essentially, on top of your CV. And that's basically what I did. I think a year before I finished my PhD, I went to see that prof from the US at a conference, and there was a very good match between what I was aspiring to and what he was doing. And so be very specific also when you approach somebody you would like to work with, because you have to explain why. So it's important. And so, I've had a blast. I spent 2 years, in the US, in California, in Los Angeles. So after all, it's like traveling to conferences and or meeting your people in the lab, etc. It's a wonderful human experience. Or you have to take it this way as much as possible, or choose the people with whom you're going to work based on also the human side of things. And it's hard to know a priori. But I remember I had reached out to former students or postdocs from that lab, and they were, all very giving praise about this prof, and this prof became a lifelong friend. So after that, I went back to France and I got this first position as a PI. But I did, I think, a little bit of a mistake because I went back exactly in the same environment, in the same lab meaning the center or institute where I graduated. And even though I had left on very good terms, and I think people wanted me to come back because to develop the technology further, etc. We were friends, etc. But as you can imagine, it's like coming back to your parents. you are always the little kid in a way. And even though they were trying to give me, responsibilities, etc., I don't know if it's me or if it's them or the combination of both, but I felt like I went back to square one and I could not fully accomplish, or I didn't feel like I was growing up. I'm looking at the title. So that was fantastic because in a way, because I had secured my first PI position. So yeah, and I stayed, I think, 8 years in that position. So that's a very long time. But retrospectively, I've had many great students. This is where I got my first PhD student, graduated, etc., and all wonderful people. But retrospectively, I think I spent too much time back home and trying to grow up and develop my activities and, let's say, my vision of how I wanted to do things, And it's important that you are given the opportunity and also the means to develop your own vision. So that's why 8 years after that, and I probably should have cut it down to 4, but that's okay. And also to put things in context, that was back in Paris. And at the time, and unfortunately, I think it's still the case, the salary of a public researcher in France was not so high. And Paris is a very expensive city, as you probably know. And we were forced to live in the suburbs, so to speak. Great suburbs. I mean, it's not the kind of suburbs that have bad reputations in France, but anyways, and we had our first kid, second kid, and even I had like a 1 hour commute to go to work and back, so 2 hours each day. I don't complain. I'm just saying that, okay, I was looking at the perspective with my wife, and the perspective would be that either we, at best, we would stay where we are. And she had also a very long commute to her work. She's not in science at all. She's a young teacher educator. I would have to have this long commute as well. And we were kind of packed in our small apartment. So the only option for us looking forward would be to move even further away from the city. And there were not too many other options in France at the time. And I said, that's not what I meant. We had a discussion with my partner, and she said, okay, let's have a look at what opportunities we could have abroad, and this is where we moved to the US again, but in a different place, and I started working as a prof, basically in a medical college, and between a hospital and a medical college, and learning from the hospital environment for what I do was super important also. And then we got lucky, and I had this position at McGill. So that's the journey. But again, I think it's important, if you can, to look at the opportunities, and if you find yourself in a position where you're kind of stuck in even a nice little comfortable like I don't know how to call it, like a nest, if you will. It feels warm and fuzzy. Maybe if you want to grow as a scientist, you want to challenge yourself, especially early in your career, or at least this is my experience. And so we took a little bit of a risk to basically move abroad. And I think being geographically mobile, and I know it can be difficult as an early career person, especially if you start having young kids, But as often in life, you can look at it as an opportunity as well, because when your kids grow up, maybe it's more difficult. So if you want to have kids, or if you already have kids, maybe, moving, you are more geographically mobile and also, intellectually mobile early in your career than later. So I think mobility, especially for postdocs, like I said, or even for your PhD, is important because it's an asset in your portfolio. Or that was my experience. So I think I should stop there for now. If you have specific questions, I don't know. I probably did not emphasize too much, failure or or setbacks, but we could talk about those.
Yeah, I have a question actually. I was really interested. You touched on like how, if I understood correctly, like your family was like not so open to you potentially following like a more creative or artistic kind of a pathway, and so I thought, like, I was wondering, how did that play out when you decide to become like a researcher, which is also like a very sort of open-ended, maybe like unfamiliar for your family. Yeah, like how did they respond to that? In particular, also because you mentioned during your PhD, your like the social support is really quite important, having your support net, and the family being part of that presumably as well. Like, so how did you navigate that?
That's a great question. So I think the anxiety from my family was coming from was for me not to get a job, basically. So if I would go and be a jazz drummer, which was my secret wish, they would be super anxious because it's not, regular paycheck kind of job. So once they understood that becoming a researcher in academia was a decent form of profession, then they were very comfortable with the idea and very supportive. Even when I decided to go after a PhD and even push that that finish line a bit further in terms of training and studying. I was, I think, very fortunate not to be in a financially insecure position. So yeah, I mean, I had a fellowship during my PhD at some point, and so yes, it was hard to leave. Hard, I don't even know, but because I didn't have so many hobbies or opportunities to spend my money, but it was okay. I mean, just sufficient to make a living in Paris, have a decent apartment, and etc. But I know finances can be a struggle because of the stipends are so low, etc. in general. So, but fortunately, I didn't have, or for me, it was not so much of an issue. Again, because of the lot of hours that we put in the lab, etc. So yeah, and talking about how I think science is bringing me closer to my inner research for an expression of creativity. I think that's exactly I'm really fulfilled in that sense, because especially in North America, I think the US, Canada as well, a lab is essentially your lab when you're a prof or you're a principal investigator. There is a little bit of a hierarchy in the structure, maybe more on the teaching side than the research side. But I really enjoy every moment, every day, literally, I organize my day pretty much the way I want to. So yes, there are meetings and things that are mandatory. There is paperwork, administration, etc. But most of those things, these are things that I chose, basically. So really, what I cherish the most is the intellectual freedom, or the appearance of intellectual freedom and time management in what I do. And what I decide to work on is also, I think, the fruit of my decision to a large extent. Or maybe this is an illusion I want to entertain. But so this intellectual freedom and ability to manage my time and my occupation is really what I cherish the most, and what brings me the closest to a form of independence as a creator, so to speak. So creativity is really something it's hard to it's hard to learn, right? So, but I think but this is something I try to encourage in the students, and I think I was encouraged to really express this form of creativity by my PhD supervisor, who was really, more like a mentor than a supervisor. She was more an advisor, I should say, than a supervisor. And so she was extremely good at understanding where I was coming from and where I wanted to go. And whenever I felt a little bit lost or she felt I was going in the wrong direction, she would just nudge me a little bit, and and then I guess I had the drive to really keep on going, which is also, I understand, something that not everyone has. And this is something you need to identify in yourself early if you want to do a PhD or become a scientist. I was thinking in preparation to the meeting about, what assets or what kind of personality traits you should have, I think. And you should be able to make efforts, like I was saying, be hardworking for sure. There's probably a romantic view of research, and science in general, but the reality is more ugly in the sense that, again, this is really calling for a lot of, working hours. But yes, creativity, but also the opportunity, the ability to take initiatives or be in an environment that encourage initiatives. I think that's very important. If you need to be told what to do next every time, at every step of the way, it doesn't mean you're not somebody, who has no value professionally. By far, no. It's more that you need to work in a more kind of team environment and project-based, etc. And you would do sparks, in the industry probably. And I don't want to say that people in the industry don't have creativity and don't take initiatives. No, but you see, there is if I want to exaggerate a little bit, the kind of drive and determination, inflicted determination and drive, that's super important to have and to entertain at every step of your career, especially during your training. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. I'd love to also hear if there's people here, either here physically or here virtually, who have questions for Sylvain.
Is it like is there any moment in your career that you were like, you know what, I cannot handle this, I cannot handle any failure like this, my data is not working, I'm fed up with this, like, kind of moment? Or if you had, how did you get yourself right on track?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think there's been instances where the data basically is not speaking. But I always, and usually what you have to do is move on. After, I'm a bit obsessive compulsive on things, as you may have understood. And before I strike out this data set or this study, first of all, you want to think twice or three times before doing so, because data is people, data is money, and data is time. So you really want to pay due respect to the people who have collected the data, the participants, for instance, in the kind of science we do, etc. And there is always hope for me that there is something there. But at some point, when the student training is on the line, because time is passing and the clock is ticking. And so at some point there needs to be a decision whether we dig deeper in this data or we switch to something else. So I think my personal way of handling this is to always have a plan B, or try to have a plan B or C or D. and right from the bat when we design the study, etc. So if possible, we always want to have, as they ask in grant proposal, a contingency plan. And I think this is very important indeed. Also, in general, you don't work with only one data set or one study when you are in a lab or where you are a prof. You have multiple projects in parallel. And yes, if one project is not moving as expected, and after you have checked all the boxes, etc., for verification, then maybe you can focus your attention and stamina on the other projects and reassign the student to these other projects. But for me, it's super hard to declare, that I lost the battle. So even after the student has moved to another project for his own or her own, security and also, mental health, I keep at the back of my mind the intention to go back myself to the data. So there is this kind of perseverance, and I try I try also to learn to the student with basically problem-solving skills, because this is something where a lot of students and trainees don't come well equipped with, because it's hard to learn outside of practice. So I try to provide tools and mental mindsets so that they check again boxes. Did I look into this, that, and if this is not working, then it's because maybe this is because of that. So troubleshooting. And so yeah, and that learns you're well equipped to persevere basically, and to basically find gold in the mud eventually. And I have more instances of that, of eventually a success, so to speak, even a small one, after going through a long period of like a desert and despair, then experiences, fortunately, of total failure, where basically the data don't speak. Yeah, so perseverance, I think, is the kind of thing I was trying to talk about as an anecdote, trying to go around the problem and to get to the other side, rather than persistence, which actually is kind of, I think etymologically, it's more that you want to stay with the same approach until it breaks, either you or the problem, but usually it's you first. So I think it's important to have this fluid approach, and this is also an expression of creativity, right? To troubleshoot things in a creative way. And often, a young trainee would shy away from this because they want to go by the book, and if the advisor says that you have to do this, and usually the advisor says so because it's it's the first nudge to get you started, then often we shy away from trying things by ourselves. But I think what makes the difference between somebody who's very studious and careful about doing things by the book, and we need people like that, and somebody who's more research oriented is, again, when you do not hesitate to go and talk to that big scientist at the podium, or try your own ideas, troubleshoot by yourself, etc.
Yeah, so it sounds like your Florentine spirit is coming out there again.
To the rescue, yeah. So again, it's that's my personal story and experience, and I really appreciate and realize this does not apply to everyone because everyone is different. But I think some of the common denominators can be found and could apply to what others are experiencing in their research life.
Do we have more questions for Sylvain, either here or online?
I'm curious, how do you mentally juggle all of the different projects that you're overseeing, or also outside of the projects or other initiatives that you're spearheading?
Yeah.
combine all of those things and
Yeah,
find the
that's-
time and mental energy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I need this diversity to get me going. So yes, multiple research projects and multiple people working on them. I don't fancy to have a big lab, you know, the biggest lab possible, because I think I soon realized in my early career that I had this magic number of 12 to 15, you know, grad students. It's already quite big, you know, I did postdocs as well. And I cannot handle more projects at once. So you have to find your magic number somewhere. And for other people, it might be less, others might be more. As long as everyone, I have the maybe the illusion that I know what's happening, you know, more or less, and what the difficulties are and progress is in all these 15 projects. 15, it's usually a bit less, but anyways. But I also need, you know, for my own balance, and it's hard to explain, to have things that distract me from research. So, or, you know, doing research. So that's why later in my career, I took on, you know, managerial or administration responsibilities, and I really enjoy those a lot. And to me, it's really a balance again, because maybe it's different parts of the brain, or and it's also the idea that when you get involved with management, it's also from hopefully the greater good. So, you know, it's very easy as a researcher to get your ego in the wrong place because, you know, it's essentially your name, right? Your lab is your name, or your name is your lab. And so, and many of us get obsessed by this reputation, you know, and this prestige aspect that surrounds your name, and you want to go after awards and recognition of some sort. But it also manifests on the day-to-day basis, you know, with different forms of insecurities. And you may have experienced yourself or heard from stories that, you know, academia is a very mean and wicked environment, people fighting each other all the time. And it's true. But when you realize that, you know, usually the stakes of these battles are really low, and you can distance yourself from those. And usually they boil down to always, you know, funding. And we're talking about small amounts of funding, internal departmental funding, space allocation, and a few other things, access to the coffee machine, these kind of things. You know, if you can distance yourself from that, that's good. But of course, more seriously, my involvement in management and research administration is also to try to, you know, invest a little bit of my energy outside my ego and, you know, my research, etc., and try to have the community, you know, work a little bit better with each other. So how do I do that? I don't know, but there's a trick I use, and you're going to be disappointed. It's that I make lists of things. And usually I use paper because it feels really good to strike out, you know, things that you have on your list. And it could be very small things or much bigger things. And this is something also I like, because usually you can prioritize things yourself when you are, you know, prof. It depends, but usually, you know. And also the timeline, etc. Your time management is really your time management. Often, of course, there are deadlines, etc. But so yes, it's super important for my own balance to have this multiplicity of things, because this is it really responds to, you know, this is how I get fulfilled basically professionally. Yeah.
More questions?
More failures. Simon.
Yeah, thanks Sylvain for the talk. I was wondering, because you're saying that you were using Neanderthal techniques, and you know, times change. We are in a different world somehow. So I was wondering, do you talk with your students how your experience helps them, and how you take into account that the science is changing and how both ways can help them. I don't know if I'm clear, but the idea is that you have your own experience, but yeah, it was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And how do you take into account their experience so that you can help them?
Oh, I see. Yeah, that's a great question. I think the science is first and foremost the people. And it's going to sound like I'm going to be flattering, but it's really, very honest when I try to say that, I'm always, what's the right word, kind of touched and I feel blessed that people, knock on my door or send me an email and tell me, oh, I'd like to work, or have an internship in your lab, or maybe do my grad studies or be a postdoc, etc. I know that many of these folks, like I was, also, send out these emails just, as a fishing expedition. But with experience, you can distinguish between those who are really genuine and really want to work with you versus those who just, spam for reasons we can understand, of course, very broadly. So I take it really as a, a blessing that somebody is really genuinely interested in working with me. And so when they, and I learn a lot from them because they come from, like you said, a new generation. And the generations in science are very short, every 4 or 5 years, you have a new generation of folks, and also the technology changes and the mindset kind of evolves. And to me, it's also something that keeps me going and entertains this drive and this maybe energy to keep on going. But yeah, to your question, so I get a lot of energy from them. And also, of course, the best ideas are usually from them because maybe I can suggest a project or, kind of an ill-shaped question or somebody, something that is not fully baked. And my goal is for them to take ownership of this idea and to shape it and bake it so that it can be shared to the world and has value and hopefully some impact. So my vision as a supervisor, advisor is really not so much the skills, the scientific skills, etc., but more the development of an individual so that they become fully autonomous and the owner of their project. And it's my greatest joy is to see this transition happen. And sometimes it's very early in the project, sometimes it's super late. And from very few individuals, it's never. And that's okay. And they're going to have their PhD and they will switch and move to the industry. And we need more people like that. And that's okay. Again, I don't want to say the industry is like the dumpster of science. So that click moment is really, that transition is really a blessing also and a joy. As much as when the data speak, and so symmetrically, I try not to be like a dad to them, in the sense that because they would not listen to what I say. If they ask me, I would share anecdotes, just like I'm doing with you today. But I think these anecdotes have limited value to their preoccupation, on getting things done. It's because it's like listening to your dad telling you stories. Oh, I wouldn't do it this way. In my time, I went exactly through the same issue and I solved it this way. Usually, I have teenagers and they don't listen. And actually they do, of course, they try something else. And that's how, innovation and creativity spurs. So I try to, unless they ask me, and not to impose on them, my experience, etc. I really want to create the environment and the conditions so that there is noise going on in the lab, and it's very disconcerting to some of them because they are usually good students and they want to achieve and they have good grades and they know exactly what to do to get their good grades. And when they get into an environment like that, where it's a bit looser, and people have to find their spot, and etc., it's a transition. It's a learning experience, a growing experience, and it doesn't work for everyone. And I have to say, the experiences I've had with overachievers and students who had amazing grades. It's not, there are many exceptions, but often these folks who really got stellar results in academia with their courses, etc., they have the most difficulty transitioning to an environment where, again, there's more freedom and more degrees of freedom to explore and more creativity to express. So I usually keep that in mind when I recruit and select students who want to join. I mean, it's important to have a good academic background, but it's not an obsession for me. Yeah, I don't want to be the old dad. Well, even though I'm sure I am to them.
We have time for more questions. Hand on, please.
You mentioned being quite hyper-focused on your research, especially during PhD and postdoc. I wondered how that has shifted for you through your career as you raised your family and things like that. How does that work-life balance, how has that shifted over time for you?
Yeah, good question. So first of all, I don't have major time, major hobbies that require a lot of time outside work, but I have many interests. So I'm very superficial on many things. And again, this is just one way for me to fulfill my curiosity about things, etc. So how it has evolved, first of all, what I'm trying to say is that it has not evolved too much, but at the same time, I don't think I'm a science geek. I shouldn't say that, but I'm not super interested in or passionate about what's happening in science elsewhere. To me, it's just I marvel what's happening in theoretical physics, in molecular biology, fields that are not mine. I have very shallow culture about this because I have a lot of admiration about what they can achieve apparently, but I'm not, I'm not interested in learning more about that. It would take too much energy, and I'd rather do other things outside the lab to balance, my brain between different things. So you could tell me, well, you could read, general science articles at work, right? But usually I'm too busy reading in my own field, or working at my, tasks, and I don't dedicate enough time to learning outside my field. So that's really, and I'm not saying this proudly, and I think I should read more general science stuff. But then more directly to your question, so I did not develop the major hobbies that would take too much time or some significant amount of time outside work. When we had kids, when we got our kids, I think I spent a lot of time with them, and it was kind of natural to me, I think. I cook dinner for the family every night, pretty much. And for me, this is a great way to, be useful to something in my day. Because often, sometimes you close your day, especially when you went through a difficult day with a lot of, tension and politics involved. Like I said, coffee machine politics. And at the end of your day, you want to be useful, or the data wouldn't speak today. You want to be useful. At least you know that if you cook dinner, it's useful to something. So to me, it's very important. And I try to stay in shape more or less. So that's my top priority, is the family, including dinner cooking and staying in shape. And for the intellectual energy that is left, maybe reading, and listening to music, and maybe playing a little bit of music. So I think it changed when we had our first kid and the second one shortly afterwards, because before that would be essentially, you know, just me. I mean, I would essentially spend my days, you know, working and trying to make sense of my scientific career, and so I think raising a family has been a tremendous transition for me, but not to it hasn't completely you know, changed my perspective on things. It's a kind of a gentle evolution. Yeah. So I hear what people are saying when they complain about work-life balance, and I think it's super important. But I think the bar is so different between people, so it's hard to say. I think it's important to realize what's good for you or where you find your balance. That's the most difficult, I think, realization. Because it's easy to invest too much time in your work, of course, and get burnt out. But at the same time, if you, you know, not fully realize your capacity or capability in you know, working and developing your projects, etc., it's also a big frustration, I think. So yeah, having support from your partner and good understanding, mutual understanding with your partner is super important. And it's a constant discussion, I think. It's an open book, so to speak. Yeah, so very, very smooth transition. But I'm not an example of, you know, like others in this room who are excel at many things, you know, including sports, music, and probably, you know, building your own furniture and growing your vegetables. No, but there are some people like that.
More questions? Yes.
I have, first of all, thank you so much for your great story. And my question is a little more general. Like you mentioned some doubting, like in your path, but I was thinking, do you have any obstacles or failures in your path as a student or in your career that you can mention today? To say, okay, it wasn't smooth all the time. I had these. I'm really passionate to hear about them.
Yeah, thank you. So probably I did not emphasize enough the difficulties today. But again, that's probably my my bias and my personality that always tries to, you know, look at the glass half full. But your question is really, and that's the purpose of this series, I guess, it's to look at the other side. But I think the career in science is a career of successive failures. For the reason that the data does not always speak. So you have to find strategies to troubleshoot, to find your way, remember, around, under, and dig your own tunnel. And you want to dig your own grave, you want to dig a tunnel that, and there is light at the end of the tunnel. But you know, you've heard this expression that, you know, it's okay to fail, and you're going to fail again, and it's fine as long as you fail better, right? Which means that you learn at every experience. And I think what's difficult, again, it's a matter of putting your ego in the right place in science, because you have your name on this paper and you send it, and it's not even a failure, it's a rejection. So you get rejected, and you get rejected by another human being who you don't know and you will never meet probably, and this is reviewer 2 or reviewer 3. So being rejected as a human being by another person is terrible, and you have no opportunity to, you know, challenge that decision, or it's very rare that it will turn out, you know, positively. So as long as you really, you know, accept that in the sense that, okay, it's part of the job. It's like, you know, being an athlete. We mentioned the metaphor with an artist, but at least the athlete, just like in our case, has this, you know, objective of, you know, going through the finish line. Or if you're a jumper, you know the bar is there. But what is sometimes difficult is that as you start, you know, running to get ready for your jump, the bar is increasing, as you run. And it's, yeah, so, and the person who decides to put the bar higher is somebody you don't know, but you see the bar getting higher. So again, and the same for, you know, sending out applications for fellowships, for grants, of course. And, you know, you hear all the time that the success rate at CIHR or, you know, competitive grants is like, I don't know, 20%. And family, if you are lucky to have, you know, a partner, or if your family is not too far, or whatever. If you are close to your family, even in spirits, I think it's important they understand what you go through to help you through it. But it's part of the job. So it's like putting long hours, you know, hopefully productive hours, but not always, into your work. You have to know from the get-go that you're going to be facing rejection. And it's important that you do not, I mean, you don't want to blame the wrong person for your failure. You don't want to blame yourself systematically, even though when you read that grant proposal or you read that first manuscript, you realize that, yeah, it's not so clear, you know, here and there, or it's a bit, you know, fuzzy. But you don't want to blame systematically somebody else, like reviewer 2 or the committee, the grant review committee, on the pretext that they did not understand. And you're the only person that understands, you know, what you're trying to do. Well, if that's what you think, that's wrong. You really want it back to the, you know, the point I was trying to make on communication. You really want to bring your passion and your intention clear to somebody who's actually not necessarily a full expert on what you're trying to do, and who's going to be your reviewer or your evaluator. And that person is trying to be honest. There are very few instances, I think, where somebody wants really to kill, you know, your manuscript because he's a direct competitor. That can happen, but I don't think that's the norm. It's more that it's a person who's not entirely in your field of expertise, 100%, who's trying to do good service to science and serve as a reviewer or committee member of a panel, and tries to make sense of your jargon. So it's really a process where you want to really fail better next time. You want to get closer to that threshold where you get funded or the paper accepted. So whenever you receive, you know, comments, even though they are not perfect and you feel that the person did not understand, well, that's probably because you didn't make your point clear enough. So you want to learn from these failures and get support from a group of very closely knit, you know, peers.
More questions?
At the beginning of your story, you said that you didn't know what to do after you tried. For example, then you found something. But as students and specifically in research, we know that we have to find a way. So, for example, to master the PhD, but we also have to find a thematic or a subject, a project that we really love. And specifically, if you said you were in computer science and it can be applied at really diverse thematic and project. Did you have a déclic or something that pushed you to go in brain imaging and neuroscience specifically, or it was instinctive? I don't know.
Yeah, it's I was trying to remember the, you know, the story around that. So as I mentioned, I think it went from very broad to very narrow, and very broad. It's hard to explain, but indeed I was, browsing those books in the library and trying to look especially at books not exactly in my section, etc. And little by little, you get exposed to new ideas, new concepts, and somehow it brews in your mind. And the next day, you want to learn a bit more, and you take another book, etc. So I think you need to be. I mean, what helped me at least is to try to be open and curious about, what's out there, and maybe notions and concepts that are inspiring, even though they might not be well articulated. So you have to, I would suggest you try to listen to, what makes you feel interested in something, even at a very superficial level. So yes, and then it's the conjunction of that, a relatively broad curiosity, some exposure to also early exposure to research, especially if you are an undergrad. I mean, it's great. I always try to welcome, 1, 2, 3 undergrads in my lab, because I know it's important for them, because it will help them realize and shape better whether they like or dislike this, environment, the lab environment in general, research in general. And so you can proceed by elimination, right? Maybe they think they love computer science, they go in the computer science lab and no, it's too dry. Next time they will go to biology. So whenever, young undergrads can seize an opportunity to explore and have experiences in research, I would always encourage them to do so, because it will help them narrow down their fields of interest. And then, of course, there is the third aspect, which is sheer luck and opportunities. And I think I remember that I found my master's project, which became eventually my PhD project, from an ad that was posted in the walls of the graduate school, with the phone numbers that you tear out, just like if you want to adopt a, I don't know, pet or whatever. And it was, I think they were advertising exactly what I felt would be interesting to me, which is, you're a physicist or computer scientist and come and work in a hospital setting and help patients and understand the human brain, something like that. And to me, it was the kind of click or declick that really helped. So there is always this component of luck and opportunities, but I think you can really nurture and create all the environment and environment for yourself to create and to be exposed to opportunities. So try to be curious about things and try to, for instance, in a research-intensive university like UDM, there are seminars, there are workshops, etc. So if you're not too busy with class, I also encourage students to, go and listen to researchers and what they have to say, and maybe especially if it's not in the field they understand, because if it clicks in them, they will understand something and it will inspire them at some point. So to entertain, this curiosity is super important, I think, because eventually that will help you, again, eliminate things you're not interested in because it's too technical or I don't know, and eventually find your spot. So it's a process. Yeah.
Thank you very much. With that, I'm just looking at the time, and I know we're busy because we're all academics with juggling many tasks. So I'd just like to first of all thank you, Sylvain, for being here with us today and letting us warm us on your fire and your wisdom. So yeah, thank you very, very much. I'd like to share a few more words of thank you. First of all, to the CRBLM for supporting this on many different levels, in particular Heather McDougall, who's been instrumental in that. We have the fantastic Alex, who's been running the show there behind the scenes in terms of like Zoom and everything. So thank you so much. University of Montreal, of course, for this room. As you might know, this Growing Up in Science is inspired from an initiative at University, New York University. Weijie Ma, Professor Weijie Ma spearheaded this. And you can look online on growingupinscience.com for other chapters who also publish some of their talks. You can see them on YouTube or at least attend them in person. Growing Up in Science Montreal is like a lovely little team. I hope I catch everyone. We have Heather, Claire, Anka, Alexandra, Jasmine, Semane, Ming, and Shuyi. Apologies for mispronouncing words and names there. And I'd like to invite to thank all of you for joining, and of course Sylvain most of all for being our wonderful first speaker here.
Thank you,
Thank you very
Floris.
much.
Thank you all, and long life to Growing Up in Science in Montreal. Thank you.